We're going to be looking today at a few different myths around publishing and aiming to give you a little bit of insight into where they come from and the truth behind them, or indeed the not truth behind them. And we'll have plenty of time for questions as well. So I think we'll do about half an hour of questions at the end. So all of our panelists are very, very lovely. Please don't be shy about asking anything you want to know about publishing or writing to them. So I will introduce them now, and they will give you a little wave as I say their names. Emily Ross is the co-founder of Story Smith Bookshop in Bristol, which she opened with her husband Dan in 2018. The shop has since been shortlisted for Independent Bookshop of the Year twice, and in 2021 was named by Guardian readers as one of the UK's best independent bookshops. Before opening Story Smith, Emily worked in production roles at children's publishers including Hachette, Usborne and Bloomsbury. Abby Fellows has broad experience in the industry, having been a literary agent at Georgina Capel Associates prior to working as a literary scout at Rosalind Ramsey Limited for 7 years. She's also worked as a bookseller at Blackwell's and on the sales team at Faber & Faber. Outside of her day job, she has experience as a school governor with a focus on working with disabled children and children with special educational needs. And Abby's clients include the authors Musa Okwonga, Simon Mear, Lizzie Huxley-Jones and Penny Pepper. Gyamfia Osei began her publishing career as a bookseller at Waterstones before joining Kasky Mushrooms as a literary assistant. She returned to the UK after living in Amsterdam for 2 years, where she was managing international sales for the Pepin Press and was also editor at Plural magazine. Gyamfia is now an agent at the Good Literary Agency and believes that the books on our shelves should represent the streets that we walk down, and is extremely passionate about finding new and diverse talent. Lucie Sharpe is marketing manager at Little Brown, which is part of Hachette, and develops campaigns for commercial and literary fiction and non-fiction. She's been working in publishing for 9 years, starting out at Penguin Random House and joining Hachette just a couple of years ago, actually. Jay Chandler is publishing director for Baskerville, which is a new imprint for literary crime and thriller fiction within John Murray Press at Hachette. And don't worry, we'll be talking about all those layers of publishers in just a moment. Her past publishing includes best-selling and award-winning authors like Abir Mukherjee, Denise Mina and Yo Nesbo, and she's keen to commission a distinctive new list of writers who span the breadth and depth of crime and thriller fiction. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. So let's start at the beginning of the publishing process, or at least the beginning of publishing a book as opposed to writing a book, because I guess that's the true beginning. So myth one that I want to look into. So the only thing a literary agent does is get a writer a publishing contract and get paid, and that's it. And that's like, I can see the side of me, some like people tensing up. So Abby and Gyamfia, I'm going to come to you for the first question. So I'd like you to, in a sentence each, describe what a literary agent does. So Abby, let's start with you.
So we manage our authors' careers from development through to publication and beyond. So getting the deal is really exciting, but most of the work goes on either side of that, and it's a very long-term process.
Gyamfia, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, completely agree with Abby. I think we advocate for our authors from beginning to end. So yeah, the deal is an exciting part, but there's a lot of development that goes in before that, and then you are kind of the first port of call for your author from the deal onwards, so when the book's getting made and basically forever in their writing career.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about some of that advocacy, some of that work that you will do with a writer.
Should I do? Okay. So I guess the beginning is you're signing somebody based on like a nugget of an idea, or if you've read like their fiction manuscript and you love it, but you might think that it needs more development. So you will work with that writer for a really long period of time sometimes. So it can take one revision or it can take 6. So your agent is somebody who you really need to they need to understand your work, and you need to be on the same page with what you're trying to create together, so that when they're going and they're presenting it to editors and to publishers, you're both on the same page and they can advocate for you in the way that you want.
And Abby, I think sometimes literary agents are described as, I mean, you've used the word advocate, they're a champion, they can be sort of a guard between you and a writer and everybody else, they can be an agony aunt or uncle. Like tell us kind of about some of the things that an agent might do that people might not be aware of.
So I think there's a lot of mediating and troubleshooting and just really sort of being the author's support through the bumps in the road, and also demystifying, because it's very hard as a new author to understand what all these, the jargon means and the process. So a lot of sort of translating the different stages to them, and then stepping in if they hate their cover design, being the person who has those conversations with publishers and just always goes to bat for the author at every stage and make sure that everything is happening to give that book the best possible chance.
Yeah. So for you to go to bat for an author, you need to have authors. How do authors find you, or how do you find authors? Like, what are the stages in getting a literary agent to represent you as a writer?
It works in both directions. So there are clients I have who I've reached out to through reading things on Instagram, the germ of an idea or a tweet, reading articles, doing outreach events, trying to get into different places where writers, not just going to creative writing schools and things like that. But also we have open submissions, and most agents do. So it's really important to look at what agencies are looking for and what they ask in terms of what you submit to them, because that will generally change a bit from agency to agency in terms of how to submit.
Gyamfia, what are your sort of top tips for people that are looking to approach a literary agent? What things should they definitely be doing? What things should they absolutely not be doing?
So, like Abby just said, I think looking at an agent's wish list is really important, because it takes a lot of energy as an author to submit to multiple agents. So you want to make sure that you're channeling that energy into the right places. So look at their wish list, look at what they are definitely not looking for. And it's really easy, I think, to kind of fall through the cracks when you're submitting by not doing something tiny, like the way that you're using your email subject or something like that. It's a bit different at TGLA, but I think with other agencies, if you're emailing, you can fall through the cracks like that. So just make sure you're really looking at those guidelines and doing everything that they say, so you have the best possible chance of getting through to that agent. But another thing that I would say is when you're at the stage where you're chatting to agents, ask them questions, because I think it's really exciting when you're speaking to an agent and you're like seeing this next step about to happen, you're about to get signed, but you need to make sure that they are the right agent for you, and that they understand your idea and that you're both on the same page. So I think ask all the questions you can at that beginning stage so that you develop a really strong relationship from the start.
I realise I've sort of, we're working backwards through the process here. Obviously we have two agents on stage, but how do people go about finding agents? Like, how do you know who is an agent? Is it a simple matter of Googling? Are there resources you can use? Are there other tips that you have for kind of hunting down people that might represent a book like the one you're writing?
I mean, the sort of, I guess, the basic toolkit is the Writers and Artists Handbook, which is a directory I'm sure people have heard of, that has everyone listed and will give a little bit of information about what genres agents work in. And from that, you can look at websites. I think, obviously, that's quite daunting. There's a lot of names in there. I think a really good thing to do is to be nosy in the acknowledgements of books that you love and just, find out who has worked on the books that you really admire, and maybe that agent is going to be a good fit for you. And it's also really nice because you can then personalise your approach to that agent. I think it's really nice when we feel that writers have approached us for a reason, and there's a reason they'd like us to represent them. Twitter is, it can be a menace, but there's a lot on there in terms of agents articulating what they want and where you can find them, where you can go to events like this.
And do you always need, if you are approaching an agent, do you always need a full manuscript, or does it depend on the type of book you're writing?
So generally for fiction, you will need a full manuscript, and you'll send in a synopsis in the first 3 chapters, and then if they're enjoying that, then they'll reach out for the full. But with non-fiction, you can send in a proposal and then sample chapters. And that's because when we're submitting to editors, we would submit a non-fiction proposal to them and sell that, and we would submit a fiction manuscript and sell that. So we kind of accept the same thing that we would submit onwards.
Okay. I think we've perhaps made it sound like fairly easy, like you email in and like if they like it. But finding a literary agent can be quite a long process. What are your tips for dealing with rejection or feedback? Abby, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, rejections are obviously a massive part of writers' lives, and it's a massive part of agents' lives as well, because we're buffers for it. So one of the things I think is really useful is to not, when you're approaching agents, not do a massive scattergun approach and not, email 20, 30, 40 agents, but to actually cherry pick and really do your research, because then if you get some feedback that, several people say the same thing, that gives you an opportunity to go back and revise before you submit to other agents.
And can you submit to the same agent again? Like if they've come back and they've said, oh, we like this, but we think X, Y, Z. Is it okay to do that work and then sort of resubmit to the same agent?
So one of my clients who's actually in the Common People anthology did exactly that. So
Okay.
I could see the germ of something there, but it wasn't quite right. And I explained that, and she came back to me 9 months later with another draft, and we signed and we got her a deal. So yeah, absolutely. Feedback, I think that the best way to deal with rejection is to find the feedback, the constructive criticism within it that you think resonates and that you can action and improve.
And Jade, I'd like to bring you in here. So as an editor, what is your relationship with agents and agencies like? What are you, what sort of a relationship are you cultivating?
Well, editors work with a lot of agents. So I sit at my desk and wait for the manuscripts to be sent to me by the agents who've done all the hard work of finding the writers and developing them up to that point. So I'm the next stage of that process. And I mean, it's important to be out and meet as many people as possible, really. It happens in all sorts of different ways. It might just be that you are in touch with somebody when they submit something to you for the first time, and then you meet in person. That happened with us. We hadn't met before a submission. Or, it's part of my job to network and to get to know agents who I think might be submitting work that I would be interested in commissioning.
And tell us a little bit about that sort of process of agents submitting work from both sides, because I guess, like you were both saying, that scattergun approach isn't really advised for writers, and I guess you as agents take the same thing forward, and someone like Jade probably appreciates that you're not just sending them absolutely everything. So how do you work out which editors or which publishers to send which books to?
Yeah. So we're meeting editors all the time. So like a big part of the job of an agent is to be networking with editors and finding out what they're looking for at that moment in time, and kind of piecing that together with the clients that you have. So when you're ready for submission, you would be making a submission list of, let's say, the 10 editors who you think would fit really well with this client and with this manuscript, and then you're submitting to them in the hope that one of them loves it in the way that you do. And then that can get wider and wider if nobody picks it up at that stage, but you will kind of have people in mind who you think would publish this book really well.
Okay, brilliant. All right, I think let's move on to myth 2. I realise we haven't addressed the payment question yet, but I'm gonna move that forward into our next myth. So our next myth is that publishers and retailers are only interested in trendy books and will pay lots and lots of money for those and ignore everything else. So Jade, I'm gonna start with you. Don't worry, you don't have to answer the really difficult questions straight away. So generally speaking, so I don't think you need to, and I don't think you probably want to talk very specifically about character or plot, but generally speaking, when you've been sent something by an agent and you are considering, what sort of things are you looking for? What are you looking to feel? What sort of reactions are you hoping to have to something that has been submitted to you and you're considering publishing?
Well, obviously it's specific to each editor, but I am looking for crime and thriller fiction, so I'm specifically looking for things that might be a bit scary, gothic, full of suspense, And atmosphere, I'm always really looking at sense of place and character. Do they give me a perspective on the world that I haven't seen before? I don't just want to publish things that are like things that have been published before. I'm looking for something new that makes me stop in my tracks and then stays with me after I've read it. It's lingering there in the mind for a long time. That's when you know it's something that could work really well for you and on your list. But it'll be different for each editor in whatever they're commissioning, I suppose.
And if you do really love something, what happens then? Do you just say, right, we're buying this, I love it, it's going to be great, let me have it?
Yeah, I wish it was
You
that
wish.
simple. Well, it starts quite early, so I would read, maybe the opening few chapters of something, and when you've been commissioning in a certain area for quite a long time, you instantly have a feel for whether something might have the potential that you're looking for. So if I read something and I read 3 or 4 chapters and I thought, ooh, I've got the tingle of excitement, this I think has got potential to be something really exciting, I would tell my my line manager, the publisher, straight away and say, look, I've got something really exciting in, just wanted to let you know I'm going to rush and read through the whole thing now. And after that, it becomes a question of, is the book right for your list at that time? There is not an endless capacity for publishing books on the list. So is there space? Is there the room to publish this book in a way that you could make it a success? And if you think that yes, there is, you then take the book out wider to the team. So you start sharing the book with the publisher, with the teams across marketing, publicity, the sales team, and see, essentially then I'm pitching the book to the rest of my colleagues and saying, we should have this book because.
And so then, Lucie, talk a little bit about, say Jade comes to you with a book, or one of your other sort of editor colleagues comes to you with a book. What are you looking for from a marketing perspective? What sort of things are you considering as you read the manuscript?
So we would be looking at ways we could reach the audience, like who is this book for? That's what our primary question would be, like where do we see the audience who are reading this book? So part of our job is to identify the places in which we could potentially market the book. So we would talk in our team about how we could reach those audiences. So does the author already have a profile? Are they a debut author perhaps? And we need to grow, from a grassroots campaign, we need to grow their profile within the industry. And how can we do that? Can we do that through our own channels? There's lots of different elements of a marketing campaign that we would look at and talk about. But I think the primary question we would address is who are our audience and how would we reach them for this particular book? And it's bespoke and different for every book. So there's not a kind of one size fits all, here's your kind of bog standard marketing campaign. It's unique. And we work very closely with our publicity colleagues and with editorial and with sales. There's a kind of collaborative approach as to how we would go about creating the journey for that particular book.
Yeah. And how much are you, and I guess this is for both Jade and Lucie, how much are you considering what is popular at the moment? How much are you trying to predict what is going to be popular and trendy in the future? I mean, publishing is to an extent guesswork and like risk taking, but sort of what can you plan for?
Shall I kick us off? So, I mean, I would say certainly from a marketing perspective, we pay attention to the trends that are affecting the way audiences are discovering books.
Okay.
So TikTok's a big one. So TikTok is definitely, I'm not the primary demographic for using TikTok. It's a very young platform and is being opened up, funny videos for all. But one of the things that has really grown on it is something called Book Talk, which is people talking passionately about books and telling stories, telling the storyline of books, and then revealing the title of said book. So we pay attention to things like that because it's a new way in which we can reach people. So we don't jump on trends for the sake of jumping on trends. We would look at ways in which those would be used as part of a successful campaign.
And Jade, what about you from sort of an acquisition perspective? I think probably everyone in this audience has seen a book become popular and then more books sort of that are similar to it being published. How often does that happen? And does that involve something different? Because and we'll talk about this, but the process of publishing a book can be quite long. It's usually sort of a 18-month, 2-year process. So if something's really kicking off now, then in 2 years' time, it might not be the thing anymore.
Yeah, and I wish there was some magic formula that I could say, yes, X, Y, and Z, and you'll have the next massive bestseller. Unfortunately, it's a bit more mystical than that. There are so many different factors that play into a book becoming a big success, but I guess I'm not going to publish to a trend, but similarly to what Lucie was saying, when I'm reading the book, I'm thinking about who wants to read this book? Somebody a bit like me, or somebody a bit like person A, B, C. You know, at the end of the day, you want to sell copies of the book. So it's how is this book going to connect with the readers? If you know that there is an audience for, let's say, Gothic historical fiction, and you think, okay, well, I can see, you know, this book's been really big in that area, and actually there have been a few others. Okay, I can see there's an audience there. It makes it straightforward in a way. But new trends come about from a really exciting book, and often something really different. So you never want to be curtailed by, you know, what's gone before. You're always looking for something that you just believe in, you love, you read it, and you get that excitement that you think a reader could have as well when they went in the bookshop and bought it, or ordered it online, or got their ebook. So there's no magic formula, but it works both ways. Sometimes you publish something, you think there's a well-established readership for this, and I know that my marketing colleagues would know how to reach this audience, and sometimes you publish something really different and that will defy expectations, and that could be the next big thing.
I'm just going to stick with trends for a moment, and Emily, talk to you a little bit. So you're sort of almost on the front lines, like you are seeing what people are buying and what they're interested in. Tell us a little bit about doing that, and whether you talk to publishers and maybe your sales rep or someone like that about what you are selling, as well as what the publisher is trying to pitch to you as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we do see reps from different publishers. We chat to them a lot about what's new, what's coming up, but we search in lots of other places as well. So we're always looking on social media, on Instagram, to see people that we follow, that we think have the same kind of taste as us. But it would be really easy to sort of formulaically say, these are the top crime books, we'll stock them all. But I think we see our role as, we don't want our shop to look like W.H. Smith travel section. We want people to come in and spot something new or different that they haven't seen before. And just as Jade is saying, she wants to publish something interesting and new and find the new trend. We're buying books in exactly the same way, where we're in a position where we can sort of show our community and our audience something that they're not going to spot elsewhere.
Brilliant. And we'll definitely talk more about kind of some of the curation that you as a bookseller do. Jade, I'm going to come back to you, and then also Abby and Gyamfia as well. So you have a book, you really love it, you talk to your colleagues about it, and then you take it to an acquisition meeting. What happens there? Generally speaking, it's different for every book, but yeah.
So the acquisitions meeting is a meeting with all the senior management from the publisher, and you'll have the head of the marketing team, publicity, sales, rights, and you basically persuade them to give you money to pay the agent for the author. That's my job, is to say, this is amazing, I think it's worth a lot. So please sign off this money for me to put this offer into the agent. Sometimes it's a really straightforward process, and other times you have differing points of view in the meeting. But everybody is there in a professional capacity as well as just a book lover capacity. So even if somebody reads something, they're in the right team and they think, okay, I've never read something like this, or I'm not the audience for this, but I can see the audience is there, so I will support you in this. It's a big cheerleading exercise, essentially, as an editor.
Since you've mentioned it, let's talk money. How do you decide? So 2 things. So first of all, give us a very, very brief rundown of how an author is paid, so advances and royalties. And then second, how do you decide on what you will pay them? Because it's not like, I don't know, it's not like medicine where for this role you get this and for this role you get this, and you know, it can be quite varied.
It can be, there is a very wide spectrum of advance levels. So authors are paid in a traditional publishing model by an advance, which means that you will be offered a certain amount of money in total for the publication of your book, or for 2 books or 3 books, however many books are in the contract deal that you're offering. And the advance is split up into sections, so you'll get some of the money when you sign the contract, some of the money when you deliver the finished manuscript to the editor, and then usually on the different stages of publications, maybe when your hardback comes out and then when your paperback comes out. So it's kind of divvied up throughout the life cycle of the book. And the way that authors get paid royalties is that when their books have essentially earned back the money that the publisher has outlaid at the beginning to give you as the advance, then the royalties start to feed through on usually a 6 monthly basis. So then there can be this semi-regular income from the book that hopefully continues to sell from that point on. And in terms of how we work out what to pay, I mean, there are spreadsheets involved. There are finance people who are saying, well, you know, how much do you need to pay? This is a business. We want to, you know, make a profit. We want the author to do well out of the book as well. Obviously, it benefits everybody if the book is a success. So you basically talk to your teams across the business and put in a very educated guess about how many copies you could sell. And based on how many copies you think you could sell, you work out the advance from that.
And Abby, as an agent, you obviously want to get the best deal for your author. Do you kind of go back and you say, well, actually, we think this? Are you also crunching those sums as well on your side and kind of trying to do some estimations? And is the highest sum of money the one that's always going to win out, or are there other considerations for both you and for the author?
Yeah, so I'm returning to the myth that all agents care about is money, because it really isn't. And you know, obviously that's really important in the sense of the writer getting a fair pay, and considerations such as, particularly with non-fiction, if there's travel involved, research involved, is this advance going to enable them to, you know, logistically, will this work for them to be able to write this book? Can we get a bit more of the advance up front to help them with that? But also, you know, of course, we'll try and negotiate the best advance, but when I'm putting an offer to one of my authors, I'm also talking about what the editor is going to do for the book. So the editor will have communicated to me anything they might want to change about it. They may have had a conversation with the author directly that I will facilitate, because we want to know that they're the best fit, that they have a good chemistry, and that this person will really champion this book and make it the best they can be. And then also, we'll also factor in what the publisher is telling me in terms of marketing commitments, you know, how they're going to make sure that this book gets into bookshops, that it gets reviews, that it's, you know, gets plenty of marketing. So there are lots of things. It's not just about kind of how many zeros there are. Lots, hopefully. But.
And Gyamfia, tell us about, so I suspect that if people in the audience have heard about a book being bought, I suspect it is probably a book that was bought, 1, for a very large sum of money, and 2, at an auction. So tell us about what an auction in publishing might involve, and kind of why that might occur.
Yeah, so an auction would essentially be if you've sent it out to multiple publishers and multiple editors have wanted to take it on, then you would curate an auction and they would be bidding against each other. And there are different ways that you could do it. I'll pass on to Abby because she'll be able to speak more on it. But there are different kind of methods of auctions that you can have. And the thing is, it's not, as Abby was saying, it's not all about the money. So you can get to the end and there will be 2 editors and one's offered a higher amount. But you do then need to sit down with the author and chat about everything else that's in that offer. And make the decision based on the bigger picture rather than just the number. But Abby, do you want to talk about the...
No, I mean, that was brilliant. I think, yes, so sometimes we will say the author reserves the right not to go with the highest bidder because they might just feel that a different publisher, based on their track record or something they want to do in terms of marketing, just inches it. So it's really just taking a really bigger picture.
Yeah. The big picture is really important, but I also think money is important.
Yep.
You know, this is an author's, often for the first book, it's almost like your life's work that you've been working towards. And publishing is a business, but there have been quite a few discussions, especially within the last year, about openness around advances and kind of the differences in advances paid, because I think that there was some work, particularly in America, done last year, where there was a clear difference in advances paid to black authors than to white authors. How can we be more open about the whole process and the money involved? And is being open about the advance process and kind of the royalties key to making publishing more inclusive, do you think? Abby, do you want to start with that?
I think it's really important. I think anyone who followed the Publishing Paid Me hashtag last summer, I think a lot of people were very shocked. This was, a lot of authors were revealing what they'd been paid at different stages of their career. People were really surprised. I think for me, I'm very open with my clients about what they might expect, because I think people can go into it thinking, we tend to hear the announcements about overnight preempts, 7 figures. Sadly, that is not the case for most books, and I think writers need to go into it knowing, this is what you're likely to get for your first book, and these are my aspirations for you, but also realistically, we need to understand how this business works and where the other spending is, so what the publisher's other costs are, and what they're factoring in when they make those decisions.
Jade, is it a case of also trying to make sure that we do understand publishing as a business a bit before? I mean, you mentioned sort of the acquisition meeting both being that kind of like, well, we are a company as well as passion for books, and I think often that passion for books is kind of the thing that is quite emphasised, like everyone's in it because they love reading and they love stories. Do we need to talk more about publishing as a business that does have a bottom line and does need to make money for everybody involved?
I mean, I suppose so, because if the publishers don't make money, then they can't keep publishing books. So, yeah, it needs to work for everybody. But, yeah, there is a huge disparity in advances, but not just within auction situations. It depends which part of the market, the publishing and writing market that the book sits within. It has to be, the advances are based on how much, as I said, you think the publisher thinks that they can sell. And I do think it's important to remember when the announcements about the auctions, big overnight preempts and stuff come out, that is the beginning of the PR campaign for that book. The publisher has paid a huge amount of money. They now want this book to be a massive success for them, for the author. The agent wants the same thing. And so we've got to start shouting about it straight away. That is part of the marketing exercise in itself. So it's not just for the sake of it, it's because that's the beginning of the journey to try and follow through on the promise that you've made, which is, I'm going to make this a bestseller, thus I've given you a huge amount of money to do that.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a good point at which we can move on to myth 3, which is that if a book is brilliant, it will find its audience as if by magic. So Lucie, let's start with you. A book is obviously a labour of love for an author, but to turn it into, and this might sound quite harsh, but to turn it into a product, because that, a book is a product as well, does require a team effort. And you sort of mentioned a few things before, but tell us a little bit about, are you involved? You obviously, you go to the acquisition meeting and you sort of say, well, if we buy this book, this is what we can do with it. And then if it's bought, Jade or an editor will obviously spend some time doing some editorial work on it. Are you involved again from that stage? Are you kind of thinking about it from that early on, or do you sort of come back in a bit later?
I mean, first of all, let me just start by saying that myth sums up, I guess, the biggest myth about marketing as well, generally, that these things just magically happen and people will just pick them up one day and it was serendipitous. And of course, you can also discover books like that, but most often there is a lot of behind-the-scenes work going on that you're not aware of. So I guess it's we are involved from the acquisition stage. We, as a marketing team, will meet together before our representative goes into that acquisitions meeting. We will discuss the proposal. We will, obviously, everything that we talk about will also be dependent on the sales view of how many copies the sales team think that they can sell, and our marketing is also related to that. So our objective, if you like, is to meet that sales target. So we are working with a budget and a plan to meet that. So that's what everything relates back to. And then in the kind of passionate way that we've talked about, so that's the kind of business side of the angle of the campaign. But obviously, yes, we are all book lovers. So then out of that needs to come a campaign that is creative and meets, not just what the author's expectation is, but what fits the book. So that could look like, that could start a year out, if this is a really long, if this is one of those big books that we've just talked about, which has had this kind of massive auction, we might start doing that campaign 1 year out, and that's a lot of activity. Might be brand building, so it might be an exercise in introducing, if it's a debut, introducing that author into different events in publishing. So from the publicity side of things, that isn't my job, but we work closely with publicity. It might be physical events. From the marketing side of things, that's often online content. So that might be brand channels. So it might be the author's Instagram or Facebook or Twitter account, providing visuals and video content. And I guess when you're thinking about it, you have to think about what a consumer would be interested in. So that journey begins sometimes as far as a year ahead, and sometimes it's 6 months ahead. So we will begin creating proofs or advanced copies of a book. So that falls under the marketing department. We work very closely with editors once the manuscript is ready. And it won't be a final manuscript. So these advanced copies that we print might often have, the odd typo that hasn't quite been spotted yet because it's not a final copy. And those are to go out to start building reviews. So they will go out to other authors. They will go out to influencers, and by that I mean somebody with a channel. So that could be somebody who's on Instagram, for example, and talks about books a lot. And it's important both from a review perspective, so that we can get reviews in and start using those in our campaign, and as well as building content. So when you go online and search for this book because you've seen an ad for it on a website that you've been on, or because you saw an ad when you were at the train station for it, it will come up because we've got Amazon ads running for it, or because you see on your Instagram feed that there are 3 influencers that you follow that are posting about it, and might feel organic, but it's happened because behind the scenes we've done that legwork. So long answer, sorry.
No, it's great. All that insight is brilliant. Emily, at what point might you hear about a book, and sort of how does that process work for you? Because obviously you are, at the same time as perhaps hearing about books that are going to come and considering what stock you're going to buy, you're also trying to sell the stuff that you have already as well.
Yeah, so if it is one of those, huge auction titles, we'll often hear about it a long time in advance. And we'll speak to our reps at various publishers, and we kind of build a relationship with them where they can't just send us everything because we're a small shop and a small team, and we can't read, we can only read a certain amount. So we build a sort of trust with them where they will understand our stock and understand what sort of books we're interested in and selling, and we will ask for proofs based on that as well. So yeah, we get very excited when we get proofs in for things that we're interested in, and we'll be fighting over them in the bookshops, who can read them first, and then we'll start to talk about that to our customers as well, as things are coming in. But it can be that we've read a proof for something, 5 or 6 months before it's published, and we're just desperate to, get the books on the shelves and get talking to people about it. And yeah, it's always an exciting day when something that you've been championing for a while finally publishes and comes into stock.
Hand selling is really, really key, particularly to independent bookshops. What sort of things do publishers do to support that work that you do? That part of that, it's not just magic that you're kind of selling out. So are there practical things that you might have, and that retailers in general as well? I don't know if you can speak a little bit more widely as well.
Yeah, so we're going to be quite different to someone like Waterstones, where their space is sort of, things like extras and special editions and that sort of thing make a big difference. So if you've heard about a book and you're excited about a book and you see a special edition of it in Waterstones, that's really great. For us, it's quite different. I mean, we do have indie exclusive editions of books that we're always really excited about. But in terms of sort of extra bookmarks and bags and that sort of thing, that's not something that we're necessarily going for. Whereas I know in places like Waterstones, that is important. In terms of sort of children's books, it's things that make a difference for us are like window displays and sort of getting, especially if we can get the author in to, paint a window or do something exclusive for us, that really makes a big difference as well.
And obviously the sorts of books that your customers are really interested in, but how do you go about putting your stock together? Like, how do you decide, I want X copies of this because I think it's going to sell and it will be complemented by this? Like, what sort of factors are you looking at?
So we're stocking the books that people are talking about. So things like the new Sally Rooney, of course, we're going to have lots of copies of that. But we want to make our tables look different, as I said, from things that you might see when shopping online, or we want people to spot different things. So we want to make sure we've got enough books that you recognise on our tables, in amongst things that you might not, from independent presses, or foreign language books, things that we're really lucky that we're able to sort of pick and choose and curate based on our taste and the taste of our booksellers. And if one of our booksellers is obsessed with a book that is currently there's a Korean book called Tower that he has hand sold about 60 copies of just from being so enthusiastic about it. And I haven't seen that book. It's kind of on Instagram or in lots of places. So it does make a difference if we're really passionate about something.
Lucie, you mentioned I think reviews as part of the sort of campaign around a book. How important are reviews to a book? And I'd love if you could talk about not just say mainstream newspaper reviews, but Amazon reviews or Goodreads reviews. Like, how important are they to a book and an author?
I think incredibly important. If you think about, when we mentioned talking about a book as a product, if you were to go online and buy any other product, one of the first things you would do would be to check the reviews. And okay, that might be slightly different when we're talking about something that's electrical, for example. But I think it's important because you want to know that you're about to invest your time and your money into something, what others thought of it. And as you mentioned there, like newspaper reviews, yes, of course, they're very important and it's great to have them. But they are, I would say, as effective as reader reviews. And you've mentioned Goodreads, and we also use NetGalley, which are both sites where people can read books for free, request them and read them for free. And you can then have real people's reviews, and there are very strict rules around Any reviews you see are real reviews. We don't make them up. And especially those that are then posted on Amazon, that could make the decision for somebody on whether they're going to buy that book or not. So I think it's really important that we use them, and we will often create something called an A+ page on Amazon specifically, but which is imagery on the product page, which will showcase some of the top reviews to give people an idea of what people are saying about it, and potentially a product image as well to show what the book actually really looks like in real life, rather than just seeing the beautiful jacket. But I think it's one part of the process, definitely, in a kind of consumer buying journey.
Jade, to come to you for a moment, obviously as an editor, I guess a lot of your role is editing the book with the author. But in terms of kind of the other things that are going on within the business, are you the main point of contact for that, and then to feed that back to the agent and the author? Is sort of everybody talking to the agent as well?
The agent's there all the time, all the way through, and it's a very important presence, and often I should think the first port of call for the author. I wish that my job was just sitting and reading all day and editing, because I love doing that, but that's probably an older, that's how editor's job used to be, essentially. It's very multifaceted these days, and so I kind of describe myself almost like a project management job, because you in-house are the person that brought this book to the table for everybody else to work on, and it means that I have to cheerlead for that book all the way through, from the point of acquisition when it goes through the meeting right until publication, and continue after publication. It doesn't stop. So I will be the primary point of contact for the author in-house. That shifts a bit later in the process as well to their publicist once the publication date comes around, and they'll be in touch with them a lot to do with organising events and going out and about, that sort of thing. But I'm the person that will be checking in with all of the different teams to check that everything's coming along as it should be with the book. I'll say, Lucie, how's the marketing campaign coming along? Can we have a chat about it? What are your plans? The other department's probably like, oh, the editor again, because you're like, so, what are you going to do for this book? That's your job, is to enthuse and to keep the ball rolling all the time. So it's a really fun job. It's a busy one, but very fun.
So if all the other departments are like, oh, it's the editor again, is the editor sometimes like, Gyamfia and Abby, do you think the editor is sometimes like, oh, it's the agent again? Are you checking in throughout this process as well, and kind of being like, oh, have we got a cover yet? Or I don't know, what's the publicity plan, or did you get an interview with so-and-so for it? Are you sending those emails too?
I don't think it would be necessarily about like interviews and like the smaller things, but with the bigger things, if we're like expecting a cover reveal, we'll be checking. And like if proofs are going out and we're expecting them to be delivered, we'll be checking. So yeah, we are always in contact with the publishers and with the editors.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we don't have to, a lot of editors are really brilliant at just feeding through that information. So, but yeah, our job is to check on their checking, make sure it's all happening.
Yeah. So we'll do audience questions in a few moments. But one sort of question for all of you that I would love you to answer in turn is, what do you think most surprises people about your particular role, and what do you think everyone should know? What is one thing that everyone should know about what you do as well? So we'll start at this end.
Okay. Sorry, Gyamfia. Now the best answer, probably. I think really what we've talked about, that your agent is not just there to kind of sweep in, sell a book, take 15%. It's really about every stage, and it's about hopefully a long-term career and strategizing for years ahead, and that you really need really, really good communication and trust with your agent, because they're going to be there every step of the way.
Brilliant. Jade?
I kind of said it already, which is that I think there's a perception, and it was certainly my perception before I ever worked in publishing, that editors sit around and just read all day, and we read all night, but we have a lot of other stuff going on during the day, so it's not a kind of a slow job where I sit at a desk and drink cups of tea and read slowly all day. It's a busy, fast-paced job, really multifaceted and exciting. What was the second part of the...
What should everyone know about your job?
I kind of answered that, I think. Okay.
I think for me, it's really interesting, like combining all our answers. But one of the biggest perceptions that I've found when working with people coming in on work experience or traineeships particularly is the general perception about publishing is that every job is editorial. That's essentially what happens in publishing, and there are no other teams. It's just editors editing books, and somehow they churn them out. And it's been quite a surprise to reveal that actually, no, there's a sales team, there's a rights team, there's a production team, there's a marketing team, publicity team, there's a design team. So you have all these, it's completely multifaceted, and all of those teams work together. I remember somebody coming in as a trainee once and asking me what inventory was, and I was like, oh, well, actually the inventory team are integral to our business because they make sure the books are where they are supposed to be in the warehouse and coming out of that. So you have a kind of, I would guess that would be like my my general perception that I've seen that people think about publishing houses. And I guess with my role, I've touched on it already in that it's kind of invisible, which is fine. Like that's the way our marketing campaign should be. They should feel relatable, and they should feel like they're made, tailor-made for you when you see them. But it often means that people don't know about marketing outside of the publishing industry.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Gyamfia.
I think building on what Abby was saying, the key thing about an agent-author relationship is development and strategy. So you're developing the work for a really long period of time before it's being sold, but then you're also strategizing about the author's entire career. So let's say they begin writing in fiction, but they want to move into non-fiction. That's something that you will be having conversations with your agent about at an early stage, and strategizing with them and coming up with a plan to kind of work through all of that over the years. So yeah, it's not just about selling the book. It's the whole process from start to finish.
I think for a bookseller, it's probably a similar perception that we are sitting and reading and drinking coffee. And again,
like Hugh Grant in the thing.
Yeah, people do, come in and ask that a lot. This is like Notting Hill. And there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, and that it's a sort of viable business. I think there's this sort of perception sometimes that bookshops are almost like charity. People come in and say, how's it going? Like it's all kind of a little bit doom and gloom, and I think maybe that's kind of the media to blame, but there's a lot going on in a bookshop, and we're constantly working with schools and organising events and able to adapt our business so that it's it does make money as well as being a nice place to spend time.
Brilliant, that's great. Right, let's do some audience questions. So that was a really, really quick clip through the publishing process, and there's lots to talk about. So we have a microphone. Let's go for it. So we'll start there.
Hi there. The first time was brilliant. It was such a useful talk. Thank you for that. I really need some help. So I'm hoping I'll get that. I've self-published a book. I've been working myself on getting it out. It's had lots of reviews. It's just won a huge award in Canada, which is amazing. That came out last week. It won the Climbing Literature Award at Banff. And I need help now. I need an agent or a publisher or something, because it's exhausting me. So what are my options now? It's out. Where can I go from here, please?
Who wants to take that?
Do we start with agent?
Yeah. So you're thinking for this book rather than for your next book?
Literally anything, because this year I've had no time. Every morning I'm answering emails, I'm trying to get reviews, I'm trying to do stuff. I haven't written a single creative word in a year. Okay. I need to offload this.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the award and the success, because that's amazing to do that by yourself. I mean, Jade can probably speak to this as well. There are different issues around things that have been self-published and whether an agent can then get a mainstream traditional publisher to pick that up. I'm not saying they can't ever, because sometimes that amazing track record and the proof that the audience is out there is something that an agent can then sort of go, right, we'll revert these rights to you. We'll stop the self-published version. We'll take it off the market. We'll look to place the rights somewhere else. But it really depends on the book. And I don't know, from an editor's perspective, if it's worth you talking about how that feels.
Yeah, it is a case-by-case basis. And what I would be looking at is how many copies have sold. Do we think we could sell more copies? If, for example, it had only been sold in ebook, let's just say, then I'd say, okay, well, there's definitely a print market for this. If you've sold 30,000 ebooks, brilliant. There's clearly an audience for this, and somebody should publish it in print. But if it's been in print as well, you just have to weigh up all the factors and see if you thought there was more potential in that. What does sometimes happen is that a second book that somebody has written gets taken on, and then the publisher may pick up the rights to the previously published title at that time or a bit later as part of a new deal.
But I think it's also, I would say you're in a strong position for approaching agents, and it's a good moment to reinforce that point that when you do approach agents, big yourself up, mention all these things like the sales figures or awards, make sure that you really lay out, your what you've achieved so far.
And it's not unheard of for a self-published author to get an agent and an editor. This might give you the chance to talk about one of your favourite authors, Gyamfia.
Talia Hibbert. So it's definitely not unheard of, and I think if you have a really brilliant track record of self-publishing, then like Abby was saying, you're in a great position to go to an agent and say, like, look at my book, look at what it's done. For future books, I personally don't know of any instances where a self-published book has then been published in mainstream publishing, but Talia Hibbert, who's a brilliant romance author, was self-publishing for a really long time, and then she moved to traditional publishing and is doing really brilliantly in that sphere. So you can pivot quite well if that's something that you wanted to do with future books.
Wonderful, thank you. Have we got any more questions? See some, yeah.
So my question is very similar to the previous one. And once again, I'd like to thank you for the very informative discussion that you've given us. But because of the composition of the panel, it is understandable that self-publishing hasn't been mentioned. Now, I've recently self-published a book myself, and I'm just wondering if I wasted my time. Any advice? I know you've just answered some of those questions. Thank you.
I don't think it's ever a waste of time. Have you sold any copies? I mean, it's just there are different routes in, and the reality of the publishing industry is that probably there are thousands of books being published. I cannot tell you how many more books are published than could possibly sell to the audience that's out there. And every time, however little or however much you pay for a book, as the publisher, you're taking a gamble and saying, I think it can sell, but it doesn't always sell. So, congratulations for just getting your book out there. It's the start of a journey, and it doesn't mean that you'll always be self-publishing. We'll just build on that as a basis, like our lady with the question before, and you can use it as ammunition for maybe, if you wanted to, go down the traditional publishing route. But some people are massively successful self-publishing, particularly through, on the ebook front and on, through Amazon and Kindle, and can make a lot of money.
Is it worth just perhaps briefly talking about why someone might choose to self-publish and why that might be the right route for them for the moment? I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
I suppose it connects in a bit with what we've talked about trends and what people are looking for, and I think sometimes it can feel that the clock is ticking and you just want to get this book out there, and if you have the energy to put behind that, because I think that's the thing, that it takes a lot of work on the writer's behalf, on the author's behalf in that case. But you know, sometimes it's just feeling that that your book isn't going to find its home through the traditional route, and that you just want to give it a shot.
Brilliant, thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, so we'll go to this side and then we'll come to you after. You do need it. Yeah, we're just recording this, so if you just wait for the microphone, that would be great.
I'd just like to reiterate that I think the insight you've given us today has been superb. And I have a clear understanding now of the sequence, the different stages, and the different personalities and their roles. It seems to me the most important person is the one at the start, which is the agent. And that's the gatekeeper to really everybody else. Can you remind me how I find an agent?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Let's maybe if you take 2 or 3 like really practical tips each. You can take it in turns so that one of you doesn't hog all of them. So, Gyamfia.
I think Google, I know it sounds simple, but Jericho writers, so whenever I'm like, a lot of people email into the agency asking how they can find different agents, and I think Jericho Writers has a really brilliant breakdown of the different agents out there. And it does take time because you have to find all of these agencies and then go through all of the agent pages, but the information is out there even if it is a little bit hidden sometimes. So I would, first port of call, I would dedicate some time to going through that, seeing the agents' wish lists and kind of making a top 10 or 15 that you think would be best suited to your work and then submitting to them directly.
Abby?
Get some peer support. I think that's invaluable. If you can, look out for local writers groups, local development agencies. I think we have some resources on the Good Literary Agency website of sort of regional writer support groups that can perhaps hook you up. I think having a network of other people is one way just to hear about, you know, this agent's doing interesting things, or this seems like it might be a fit for your book. And then also, like I said before, looking at acknowledgement pages, finding out which agents are working in the genre that you are writing in.
Thanks for that. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Is it far more challenging to publish not a fiction author than a non-fiction author?
I'm going to say yes. It's not a black and white answer, but with non-fiction, there is a very specific reader usually that will buy the book because they're interested in that topic, whereas fiction could be such a range, and there's so much more about it, as well as just literally what the story is, you know, the type of the writing, the style, the tone, the atmosphere. So yeah, I think non-fiction is a bit more straightforward. But don't stop writing novels, everybody, because that's what I love to publish.
Thank you for that.
Brilliant, thank you. And so then there was a question in the second row on that side.
Have the lockdowns of the last year have had any impact on the volume of books going through the publishing process? Because I kind of imagine people had a lot more free time and they thought, hey, let's be writers. So imagine there's like a glut of books trying to go through.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely saw an upsurge in our open submissions during lockdown. I think a lot of people who didn't have to homeschool, perhaps, found that time to invest in their writing. But I think also, you know, what has been one of the upsides, or one of the things that we've learned that's been positive from the pandemic, is that there are readers out there that we didn't know about. We have, I think, collectively as an industry found new ways of getting books out and found new readers and new audiences. So yes, there's more going into the pipeline, but I personally think the pipeline is widening as well.
I think it's been really amazing to see what independent bookshops have done during the lockdown periods and stuff, and how they've still got books to readers regardless, like people cycling around on bikes delivering books in their neighbourhood, you know, just completely amazing.
Agree.
I mean, Emily, do you want to talk about a few of the things? Because obviously you weren't able to physically open, and also a lot of books that were meant to be published weren't published, and were moved to later on in the year or to earlier this year as well.
Yes, definitely. So we had to completely adapt our business we had a website, but it wasn't a transactional website, so we had to put all of our stock online. And I mean, it was amazing that we were suddenly somehow busier than we were when we were open, because like you say, lots of people were sort of rediscovering a love of reading, and then that habit seems to have definitely carried on. We're finding people that have found us during lockdown are now coming into the bookshop and finding their next read. We're also finding lots of writers who have found us, who have possibly self-published, who want to work with their bookshop. And I think it's really surprised me how many we get. I didn't before opening a bookshop, I didn't realize how sort of big that part of the job would be. But we have, I don't know, between 10 and 20 writers approaching us a week to ask if we will stock their book. And I would say sort of a way to work with your local bookshop is to just go in and make that introduction. Make sure if you want your bookshop to stock your book, that it fits on the shelf. It's not a super simple thing for us to stock an unpublished book, because we obviously have very limited shelf space, and we're having to make sure our bookshop is representative and diverse across the board, and we need to make sure we stock a real range of things that suits our customers. But there are ways that we can work with self-published authors or local authors, such as, if you're going to tell all your friends to shop with us, we can have a link on our website where you can buy, they can buy your book and you can sign them all for them. So there's definitely ways that we can work with local writers too. Just to add.
That's great, thank you. I think there's a question behind, and then there's lots of, so let's go to the back there. Person in the, I think it's a blue t-shirt, black, I can't tell, sorry.
Hi, thanks so much for all your wisdom today. I'm aware that perhaps other panels are going to be able to speak to this more because of the issue in the topic area, but I was wondering about diversity in terms of your client list, and specifically when it comes to socioeconomic background, and kind of how you might treat those authors differently in terms of intersectionality and in terms of like taking care of them, thinking about the wider world that they exist in. And how are your minds on that? When and how are your minds on that?
Abby, do you want to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Good Agency was set up to specifically work with underrepresented writers. I think any initial conversation between an agent and an author has to be about, their sort of broader context and their needs, whether I'm talking to a disabled writer or really any writer, like if there's any particular considerations I need to know about in terms of, what their working life is like, what sort of advance do I need to get to make this viable for them. So I think, you're always having to take into account your author's personal circumstances, their mental well-being, all of their health concerns, anything like that. So it's very much individual, but for me certainly, and I'm sure for Gyamfia, that's always like one of the opening things we talked about before we sign somebody. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Did you want to?
Yeah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, it's about total transparency at the beginning and developing that level of trust from the very beginning, so your agent knows exactly how you want to work and they can use that to set deadlines or not set deadlines, and just make sure that you're in a comfortable working position and you're both going to get, you're going to create the best possible book together. And I think every author-agent relationship looks different, and you can really curate that from the very beginning, just through open conversation, I think.
I think, this is my favourite subject, but I think it's also, the onus is on us as agents to advocate for writers who haven't had the traditional route, who perhaps haven't had the money to do creative writing courses and all of those things. So I think, that is a personal responsibility and a business responsibility to really boost people, help build platforms, to put people in a position where they're, going to be financially viable for a publisher. And to invest in writers who haven't been able to spend a lot of money on investing in themselves necessarily.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So there was a question, I think, on the end here was it the second row? Yeah. And then there was a question at the front.
Hello, thank you. You talked about sort of when you get books, when you publish them, when you champion them and being behind them. I was sort of curious, what happens in your role if the books don't sell? And what happens with that writer as well if actually they're not a success? Thank you.
Jade, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and the reality of working with a lot of authors is that not every book is going to be a massive bestseller. Most books aren't going to be a massive bestseller. Most books sell well to a level. It's really hard, and it's a heartbreaking part of the job as an editor. It's much worse for the author, but you only do the job because you love it. You would not do it otherwise. You've got to have that passion, because you just, honestly, you couldn't keep going without the passion for the books that are at the heart of it, and the writers are the people that are bringing the books to us. So in terms of what happens if a book doesn't sell well, it doesn't mean that's the end, you're cut off. There are lots of factors that could go into a book selling or not selling. Most books are bought not on a one-book basis, so you probably would have a multi-book contract with your publisher anyway. So if something wasn't selling through, that's how we refer to it once it's in the shops and selling through to customers in the shops, we would be trying to do things to, number one, reverse that trend. So we'd be talking to the marketing team, the publicity team, trying to get more things happening that could bring more attention to the book and get it into the hands of readers. But if you're further down the track and it's sold, to a certain amount, but not the amount you were hoping, the conversation with a good publisher should then turn to, okay, what can we do with the next format of the book? If you'd published in hardback first, for example, you've still got a paperback version of that book to come later down the line. How can we change the story around this book, make sure that the paperback has the best chance of success? Or if it was the second format of the book, how do we change the story on the second book? Maybe you work together with the writer to put a slightly new angle on what they were writing next. It's a really collaborative thing. And I think a good editor and a good agent will always take the time to just sit down and do that brainstorming with you, because everybody wants the book to succeed. Nobody wants, no sales. That's not good. So I would say, don't give up hope if a book doesn't sell through to the level you're expecting, but be pragmatic and think and work with your team, who's publishing you, and put, solid plans in place for what could be different next time. And use your agent if your editor isn't doing that.
Yeah. Does anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, is that all right? I was just going to add that also, one, I would say I agree completely with everything Jade has just said, but that there are so many steps before the conversation that would happen with an author to talk about what's happened. There are so many other things that we would be trying in-house before we got to that point. So in many cases, if the sales are off to a slow start, marketing publicity, it's our favourite question. What more can we do? But that will be the first question, and we would look at what more we can do. Is our campaign resonating in the way that we had hoped? Are we reaching people in the right places? Are there different places that we could be reaching people that we aren't currently? Is it more about retailer outreach, because we work with bookshops, independents, and the major chains as well as supermarkets? So is there more that we could be offering them to make this easier for them as well? I would just say that there's lots of steps before you get to that point, as well as not every book is, not the strategy behind every book isn't always to have a huge splash on publication. Some books are designed to be published to sell over a number of years. So is the low number on publication an issue, or is it something that we had projected? So just lots of factors, as always, to think about.
Wonderful, thank you. And then there was a question at the front. Yeah, and I see some more hands as well. Okay.
Hello, thank you very much for that. My question is something that you haven't mentioned, which is about numbers of submissions. So this is probably mainly for the two agents. I have been lucky enough to do an MA in creative writing alongside my job, and we've been sort of given quite scary, sort of realistic, I'm sure, figures about the numbers of submissions, and yet we were still all encouraged to go to try and get yourself an agent. And so I'm wondering about the numbers that you get, and also if you ever recommend people to go down the self-publishing route or other routes because you don't think it's quite a fit, or if you ever recommend other avenues.
I take this one. I think off the top of my head, I would say we get about 150 a month. Don't quote me on that though. But what we do at the Good Literary Agency is we read every single one of those and we will provide feedback. So I think it is daunting to think about those numbers and to think about your own book, but it is absolutely worth submitting because it only takes like an agent to read and fall in love with your book, to then have a conversation, to then move it to the next stage. So I don't think it's ever a reason not to submit. And answering your second question, I personally wouldn't say go and self-publish, because I don't think I would know enough about the author's situation or the book to suggest that. But what we will do, aside from the feedback that we would give, is if we see a lot of potential in a manuscript but we think it's not quite ready yet, we would do something called a revise and resubmit, where we would give some more detailed feedback and kind of send that away with the author. And if they want to submit, then they're open to doing that again. So I think we always try and give as much as we can with the time that we have. And we have a brilliant submissions coordinator who will read and give all of that feedback.
I guess, is this where it's really important to follow guidelines on agent websites?
Absolutely, yeah, and definitely give yourself the best chance in that respect and do the research. But I was also going to say something about just like how you frame the rejection you get from agents, and how it's really important to keep, I'm sorry, this might just sound a bit obvious, but just to keep in mind that it's not, you know, there are so many factors when I'm deciding who I represent, and it may be that your book is just too close to somebody I already work with, or it may be that, you know, time flow. There are so many factors to do with timing and things that are outside of your control. So I think that should be an encouragement to persevere, because there are so many agents out there and we all have different tastes. And I will sometimes recommend something to an agent friend if it's not right for me.
Wonderful, thank you. Brilliant. So,
I just had one question to carry on from that.
okay, if we go, and then we're going to go to you over there, and then I think there was a hand right at the back as well.
Just a quick, how long should you be expecting to wait after submitting? Because usually on the agents' websites, they sort of say 2 months, but in reality, it seems as though it must be quite a lot longer than that. And has lockdown affected that as well?
So I think most agencies publish, like you said, their sort of expected time. I think ours is 3, but we will generally advertise on social media if for some reason it needs longer, or if we close our submissions for a period. I think, you know, don't be afraid to check in if quite a bit more time has passed than you were expecting. Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky that we have quite a big team. We're very collegiate, so we're able to keep on top of the submissions most of the time. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely been an uprise in how many things we're approached with.
Wonderful, thank you. So over there in the black, please.
Hi. Yeah, I'm interested in, so you talk a lot about the market and then the needs of the market, but also it feels like, you know, I imagine it's a very sort of middle-class world, the whole publishing thing, and probably a lot of authors who get published. And I wonder what can be done in terms of creating that, increasing that space through the roles that you do in order to open it out more. Because it's like, for what you're saying, you know, it's like stuff has to fit or on trend or whatever, but surely you create a lot of those trends as well. through your work, through the marketing, or obviously certain people get popular who come from more working class backgrounds, etc. But it still feels like it's a very sort of middle class world. And I'm wondering if what you see your roles as opening up that space and making it wider.
Yeah. Jay, do you perhaps want to talk generally about some of the things that the industry is doing and some of the problems that it still has?
Yeah. Well, you're quite right. It is quite an overwhelmingly middle-class industry. I think things have started to improve. Also, it depends which area, what sort of writing you do. I specialise in crime fiction, and there are lots of working-class writers writing crime, and there's a great tradition of that. There is less diversity in other areas, like writers of colour, for example, which is something I'm always conscious of when I'm commissioning, and I'm always saying to agents that I'm actively looking for people from a really diverse range of backgrounds for the books I'm commissioning, which is great when you're working with somebody like the Good Literary Agency, because they are proactively looking for clients like that. But yes, it's a very big publishing existential question, which is how to break out of that bubble. So I work in the Hachette, which is a big publishing company, the new Bristol office just around the corner from here. So that's an example of one thing that a publisher has done recently. Hachette has opened 5 national offices around the country to try and diversify their hiring, the sort of staff that are working for the company, because ultimately the people who are on the inside of the publisher are the people who are influencing which books get commissioned. So it's really important that that workforce is representative of the population as a whole. And events like this festival, being run and appealing directly to people who are interested in, who are working class writers or want to talk about issues of class. There are so many things going on, I feel like I can't list them all, but yeah. It's going to take a while to tip the balance, I think, is the answer, but it's starting, and that can only be a good thing.
I mean, I would just add to that Hachette specifically, along with a lot of publishers, are doing a lot to try and make the industry open to anyone, to anybody who wants to work in publishing as well as be published. So Dialogue is one of our imprints, and that was set up in 2017 by one of our editors, Charmaine, which specifically looks to commission and publish books from underrepresented voices from every breadth of society. We also have a traineeship scheme which hires 10 trainees each year, and it's in partnership with the agency Curtis Brown. So those trainees get to spend a year in one of the teams in-house. They also get to spend a month at a literary agency and a month working on the shop floor at Waterstones. So there are lots of avenues in which the industry needs to be opened up, and those are in progress, and more is being done. But yes, I think we can acknowledge definitely that there's particularly in the past been an issue where it's been middle class and underrepresented of the full range of societies, but definitely more is being done, and it's something that people within the industry feel passionate about opening up to make it for everyone.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I think we can squeeze in maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So there was a hand right at the, yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the point that I think both of the agents mentioned, which is about author development. Now, I think all writers, we want to rely on our innate talent, but, recognising that you need to learn your kind of skills and improve your craft, I'd be interested in what advice you had. I did a Zoom conference this week with some debut authors. It was very, very interesting, but I noticed that 2 of them had done creative writing courses at big-name publishers in London, which might not be possible if you're based in Bristol, or if, as you've already mentioned, you simply don't have the funds to invest in that. So what things might writers do to develop themselves?
Yeah. So I think Abby mentioned it earlier, but finding a writing group that, so these big courses are great, but they are a lot of money, and they are in London a lot of the time. But I think finding a writing group of other people who are writing in a similar genre, and I know that Meetup, which is an app and also a website, have a lot of writing groups, and all you need to do is like find one that you like and apply to it, and they will meet once a month at a cafe, and you can build relationships with other writers and they'll read your work. And I think this sort of peer review is really brilliant when you're in that development stage and maybe you're not quite ready to send out to an agent yet, but you want somebody else to take a look. I think finding other people in a similar situation is really helpful, and you don't have to pay loads for it.
Any other tips?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Twitter again, annoyingly, but I think do just look out for opportunities like the group you went to, and I think if you can sort of be following the people. So there's a great company called Untitled Writing who support underrepresented writers, and they do a festival, and they're very good at kind of signal boosting opportunities for writers. And also looking out for established writers who are open to taking on mentees. That's a brilliant way, obviously, to get, if you're lucky enough to get a position. So just trying to plug in to groups that are actively working with underrepresented writers, because they will signal boost others, and then you can build a network of resources.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we can squeeze in one more question if anybody has one. No? Okay, all right, we will leave it there in that case. Thank you all very much for coming. If this has inspired you to sort of take your writing to the next stage, there is a speed pitching event this afternoon. It will take place in this room at 2:00, and you just need to turn up, and you will be paired with an editor and be able to talk to them about your work. But thank you all again very much for coming. Thank you for your questions. If you did have a question you didn't get the chance to ask, maybe you were a little bit shy, I think everyone's probably happy to hang outside for a couple of minutes, and you can talk to them there. But please join me in thanking Abby, Jade, Lucie, Gyamfia and Emily for their time today.